A high school grad who got demoted deserves no better than this. At our first reunion in 5 years, Joshua, the son of CEO, Mr. King, handed me a paper cup filled with muddy water. As I froze, staring at the murky brown liquid, Joshua and the other colleagues burst into stifled laughter. "Come on, drink it already. I went out of my way to prepare this for you." Even after all these years, the same malice as before lingered in the air. But escaping this situation wasn't even an option for me. With trembling hands, I slowly brought the paper cup to my lips. Just as the water was about to touch my mouth, it happened. What do you think you're doing to this person? Do you even know who he is? A beautiful woman rushed into the room, snatching the cup from my hands. Her next words left Joshua and the others standing in shock, unable to hide their astonishment. 5 years, it's been 5 years. Murmuring this to myself, I looked up at the building in front of me. My name is Marcus, 25 years old. I work at a company called King Partners, which specializes in real estate development. 5 years ago, I was transferred to a regional branch due to a certain mistake, but just last month, I received orders to return to the head office. That's why I'm here now. After graduating high school, I spent 2 years at the head office, but honestly, I have no fond memories of it. I grew up in a relatively well-off family with loving parents and a slightly frail younger sister, 3 years my junior. The four of us lived happily together. But when I started middle school, an unexpected tragedy struck our family. During a family trip, we were involved in an accident that took the lives of our parents. My sister Alice and I survived with minor injuries, but we ended up being taken in by relatives. However, they saw us as a burden, an adolescent boy and a younger girl with medical expenses, and we were passed around among them. While they didn't outright mistreat us, their reluctance and the uncomfortable atmosphere were palpable. Alice and I learned to live cautiously to avoid being seen as more trouble. But the stress of losing our parents and living such a constrained life began to affect my sister's health. She started to get sicker, more frequently hospitalized than ever before. What about her hospital fees? The money their parents left us is almost gone. What are we going to do? Maybe it's best to consult someone about putting her in a facility. I accidentally overheard the relatives talking, and I couldn't stop trembling. If things continued like this, I would be separated from Alice. That thought terrified me. To me, Alice was the only family I had left. If that's the case, I'll earn the money for her treatment myself. From that day on, I took immediate action. I spent less time studying and more time in front of the computer. Since my father had been an engineer, I'd grown up using computers and had acquired advanced skills far beyond what most adults could understand. After my parents passed away, I had neglected these skills, but now I saw them as my only way to earn money. The internet was filled with all kinds of jobs, ranging from legitimate work to those that delved into deeper, more obscure territories, all of which could be done anonymously without revealing my identity. I chose the ones that offered even the slightest chance of better pay and took them on. If it meant Alice could live a peaceful life, I was willing to do whatever it took. The relatives disapproved of my actions, but since they already treated us like a burden, they didn't interfere much, which was a small blessing. I was finally freed from that grueling lifestyle during my second year of high school. I managed to earn enough to cover Alice's medical expenses and support the two of us. And we started a new life without much opposition from our relatives. Life after that wasn't easy, but I worked tirelessly, balancing school and multiple part-time jobs to keep Alice smiling. It was during this time that I met the CEO of the rapidly growing company, King Partners, through an acquaintance. After hearing about my family situation and Alice's struggles, Mr. King was moved to tears and offered me a job at his company. "Marcus, I believe you'll thrive at my company." "Thank you so much, Mr. King. I'll do my best." That's how I joined King Partners right after graduating high school. Thanks to a stable income, I was finally able to build a secure life with Alice. I am deeply grateful to Mr. King for giving me a chance. However, his son, Joshua, seemed to resent the fact that I had joined the company on his father's recommendation. Despite being my peer, he constantly harassed me with petty pranks and unreasonable orders. Even minor annoyances, when continued over 2 years, can become a significant source of stress. Still, out of gratitude to Mr. King and the need to support my livelihood, I persevered. But then, a crisis arose when a major contract was on the verge of falling through. Although I managed to prevent a breach of contract, I ended up being held responsible and was demoted to a regional branch. That was 5 years ago. The successful conclusion of that deal helped the company grow rapidly. Today, the head office is housed in a much larger building, incomparable to what it was back then. I'm not thrilled about this, but I have no choice. Steeling my nerves against the reluctance I felt, I stepped through the entrance of the head office. Hi, Marcus. I've been transferred from the Sullivan branch. It's been 5 years since I was last here. I look forward to working with all of you. On my first day after the transfer, I introduced myself in front of everyone. Sparse applause echoed through the room. Among the crowd, I spotted a familiar face, Joshua. Our eyes met, and he smirked, curling the corner of his mouth. I had a bad feeling about this. As soon as the morning meeting ended and the department head, Kyle, left the room, Joshua approached me. Let's give Marcus a proper welcome back, shall we? His arrogant attitude was just as unbearable as ever, but as the son Mr. King and someone who had risen to a higher position over the past 5 years, he now outranked me, leaving me disheartened. I couldn't afford to upset him. When I whispered a quiet thank you, Joshua clapped me on the back repeatedly. Come on, don't be so uptight. Here, drink this and relax a little. With that, Joshua handed me a paper cup filled with a murky brown liquid. Coffee? No, it wasn't, it was just muddy water. Sullivan Branch is the #1 dumping ground for rejects in this company, you know? You got sent there because you're just a high school grad, a failure, and a dropout. Drinking muddy water suits someone like you perfectly. He burst into loud laughter. Honestly, Joshua's actions were appalling enough to make anyone recoil, but the colleagues in the room merely glanced at me and chuckled quietly. When I received the transfer order to return to the head office, I had held a small glimmer of hope. I thought that maybe, after 5 years, something might have changed. But nothing here had changed. In fact, the room was filled with even more malice and mockery than before. As I stood frozen, staring at the paper cup, Joshua leaned in close and whispered in a low voice. Drink it. You know you don't have the right to refuse. Hearing his words, I tightened my grip on the paper cup. I was afraid that if I let my guard down, my hands would start trembling uncontrollably. This amount will be gone in an instant. Just endure it for a moment, and it'll be over. Repeating this mantra in my head like a spell, I brought the cup closer to my lips. The stench of dirt and mold reached my nose, and I fought back the urge to gag. I caught a glimpse of Joshua's twisted grin as he watched me with amusement. The cup was about to touch my lips when it happened. What are you doing? Before I even registered the voice, the cup disappeared from my hands. The sharp sound of heels echoed as a woman stepped out of the break room and stopped in front of Joshua. Oh, come on, Natalie, you ruined the best part. Joshua let out a disappointed sigh, flashing a sly grin at the woman. The woman, called Natalie, gave a brief sigh of her own before chastising him. You've taken this joke way too far. And besides, if something were to happen to someone who was transferred here under the CEO's direct orders, do you really think Mr. King would let it slide? Her words caused a stir among the onlookers. Perhaps spurred on by my response, Joshua clicked his tongue in frustration but said, You really are serious, huh? Well, I guess that's one of your good points, as he placed his hand under the woman's slender chin. We're on duty right now. The woman firmly declined in a calm, unwavering tone, her expression unchanged. All right, then. Later it is. Joshua smirked, ran his hand over her waist, and left the room. Once Joshua was gone, the other colleagues returned to their desks as if nothing had happened. The woman sighed briefly as she watched them. Excuse me. When she turned around at my call, I was struck by how breathtakingly beautiful she was. Her facial features were perfectly balanced and elegant. Her long, glossy black hair looked so silky that it seemed to invite touch. Her tall, slender limbs were both graceful and strong. But what stood out the most were her clear, determined eyes, exuding strength. In just a few seconds of her gaze meeting mine, my heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might burst, leaving me too nervous to move or speak properly. "Is something wrong?" She leaned in slightly, looking at my frozen face. Her voice, softer and calmer than when she was reprimanding Joshua earlier, eased my tension just a little. I'm sorry for causing trouble on my first day after the transfer." "Oh, not at all. You've done nothing wrong. It's all because of Joshua's silly antics. Still, it's just how things work around here, isn't it?" In this department, Joshua, wielding the ultimate privilege of being the CEO's son, had always acted as if he owned the place. Countless people had quit because of him and his clique. It's baffling that Mr. King, who is otherwise a respectable leader, says nothing about it. Perhaps he can't help but be lenient with his own child. As someone who came in as a mid-career hire, I can tell you one thing: it's absurd. Her clear and resolute statement made me smile without realizing it. It was the first reasonable opinion I had heard in this distorted environment in a long time. Noticing my reaction, she smiled faintly in return. "I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Natalie, the supervisor here, and I've been assigned as your mentor. I look forward to working with you." With that, Natalie extended her hand toward me. It was a beautiful, delicate, and elegant hand. As I hesitated, wondering if someone like me should even be allowed to touch such beautiful hands, she softly called out in a concerned voice, "Marcus?" Her voice brought me back to reality, and I quickly extended my hand for a handshake. "Pleased to meet you." "Yes, pleased to meet you as well." I was surprised by the firmness of her handshake, but her hand was smooth, comforting, and incredibly warm. Thanks to the luck of having Natalie as my mentor, I quickly adjusted to my work at the head office. From overhearing the office chatter, I learned something shocking: Natalie was Joshua's girlfriend. Because of this, Joshua's hostility toward me had intensified, and his harassment was far worse than 5 years ago. Following his lead, my colleagues began dumping piles of menial tasks on me, leaving me swamped. As a result, I often fell behind on my actual work and ended up working overtime almost every day. "Another late night, huh? Well, see ya, useless." Joshua would mockingly knock over the stack of files on my desk, laughing as I scrambled to pick them up, before leaving on time every day. I silently picked up the scattered files from the floor. To survive here, I had to empty my mind and suppress all emotions. "Marcus, are you okay?" The only person who cared about me was Natalie. But even she stayed late every day, working overtime to finish her tasks. And her workload was several times heavier than mine, making my efforts pale in comparison. "Thank you, but I'm used to it." "Please, go back to your own work, Natalie." "I see, but if you ever need anything, let me know, okay?" With that, Natalie returned to her desk. From her tone, it was clear she was genuinely concerned for me. If it weren't for Mr. King and Natalie, I would have quit this company a long time ago. With that thought in mind, I quickly finished tidying up and turned back to my computer. The only sounds in the room were the clacking of keyboards, hers and mine. The clock was approaching 8 p.m. I finally finished my tasks and stretched lightly. When I glanced over, Natalie was still working. Although the stack of files and papers on her desk had decreased since earlier, it was clear she still had a mountain of work left. Natalie. Ah. She must have been deeply focused. Startled by my voice, her eyes widened in surprise. The contrast with her usual composed demeanor was so charming that I couldn't help but laugh. "Hey, Marcus. That's rude, isn't it?" "Sorry. I couldn't help it." As I hastily apologized, she seemed amused by my reaction and started laughing herself. "Well, you're not one to talk, Natalie." Fair enough. A little payback, maybe." "Are you all done?" Yes. I see. Good work. Be careful on your way home." She smiled warmly before turning back to her computer, her expression shifting back to one of focus and determination. I glanced at the stack of files piled on my desk and then offered hesitantly, "If you'd like, I could help out too?" But Natalie slowly shook her head. "This is my work, so don't worry about it." "But this isn't just a week's worth of work, is it? It can't be helped. It's all on Joshua's orders." She gave a troubled smile as she spoke. "It's because you stood up for me that day, isn't it?" I clenched my fist. When Joshua tried to force me to drink muddy water, Natalie intervened, and in retaliation, Joshua dumped an overwhelming amount of work on her. On top of that, he dragged her along on his client visits and social engagements. As a result, her workload kept piling up with no end in sight. Of course, Joshua, the one assigning her all this work, never lifted a finger to help her. Here, Joshua sets the rules, after all. Natalie muttered with a hint of resignation in her voice. "Rules, huh? Well, then, it's not against the rules for me to help, is it? He never said, don't cooperate, after all. Marcus, let's just get this done." With that, I grabbed a large stack of files from Natalie's desk and carried them to mine. "Wait, hey. That's way too much." "It's fine. Believe it or not, I'm pretty fast at data entry." Dodging Natalie's attempts to reclaim the files, I sat down and skimmed through their contents. The stack contained not only her regular tasks but also pointless busywork and critical assignments where mistakes were unacceptable. It was a frustrating mix. Seriously, that guy hasn't changed one bit. I let out a small sigh and got to work. Once again, the only sounds in the room were the clacking of Natalie's and my keyboards. After about an hour, it seemed the work was done. Natalie walked over to my desk. "Marcus, how's it going?" "I'm done, so I can take over now." "I'm almost finished too, so don't worry about it." "What? Almost done already, seriously?" Ignoring Natalie's astonished voice, I finished the last entry, closed my laptop, and smiled. "All done. Great work. But it's only been an hour, and you're saying you finished that huge workload, a week's worth of tasks?" Even as I tidied up my desk, Natalie stood there, dumbfounded. I responded with a laugh to her disbelief. "I told you, didn't I? I'm pretty fast at data entry. Don't be ridiculous." This wasn't just basic data entry. There were piles of contracts, 10 years worth of historical data, and lists that required picking out relevant information from tons of other documents, weren't there? And it's not as tough as you're making it sound. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. "No way, that's true. It really is." As I replied nonchalantly, Natalie raised her voice in protest, lightly smacking a file against the desk in frustration. I couldn't help but smirk internally, feeling a bit lucky to witness a side of her so far removed from her usual cool demeanor. But then, a calm yet sharp voice cut through the moment, directed squarely at me. "Who are you, really?" Natalie's expression had completely changed, now calm and composed as she stared directly at me. The intensity of her gaze made me swallow reflexively. "I'm just a useless employee who got demoted and sent back. Joshua said so himself, didn't he? But the way you handled that work is nothing like what he described. Joshua doesn't care about me enough to say anything accurate. He's just making things up. Are you trying to dodge the question?" Although her voice wasn't particularly loud, the tension in the room was palpable. Maybe it was the stillness around us. Or maybe it was the sharp edge in her tone that made me feel on edge. I exhaled, then slowly shook my head and smiled at her. I'm not dodging anything. Anyway, if Joshua dumps more unreasonable work on you, let me know. Even someone as useless as me can help out within my limits. After all, I'm already staying late every day. Honestly. Although she still didn't seem entirely convinced, she let out a short sigh, perhaps realizing I wasn't going to say anymore. Fine. If I get stuck with any simple data entry, I'll come to you for help. Anne. She paused briefly. Thank you for today. You really saved me. She smiled as she spoke. Her smile felt brighter and softer than usual, so beautiful that my heart began to pound uncontrollably. When was the last time I had been sincerely thanked by someone like this? Until now, everything I did was solely to obtain what I needed or wanted. Helping others or lending a hand to those in trouble, thoughts like that were long gone. Because, you can't survive in this world by just doing that. I had been that desperate. But today, for the first time, I felt a genuine desire to help her. It wasn't because I expected gratitude. If I had to give a reason, it would be as simple as wanting to repay her for helping me when Joshua tried to humiliate me. But hearing her thank me face to face like this made me happy, leaving me with a strange, unsettled, and almost buoyant feeling as I headed home that evening. And as I was greeted by Alice at the door, she teased me, saying, "Wow, Marcus, you're totally grinning." After that day, I continued working overtime as usual, but something had changed. After regular hours, light snacks and drinks began appearing on my desk. I knew exactly whose quiet kindness it was. And it made coming to this once dreaded workplace feel just a little less burdensome and even somewhat enjoyable. Then, one day, the office was abuzz with excitement. Rumors spread about a major project finally getting underway. Apparently, the plan involved persuading a notoriously stubborn landowner to join a regional urban development project spearheaded by a major corporation. If successful, it would generate extraordinary profits and almost unimaginable opportunity for the company. Still, I figured such a significant project was far beyond the reach of someone like me, a low-level employee. So I calmly continued my morning preparations. Suddenly, the sound of clapping hands echoed through the room. All attention turned toward the source of the noise. Standing there with a composed and resolute expression was Natalie. I'm sure most of you have already heard the news. To participate in KS Corporation's urban development project, a special project team is being formed. From this department, I will be joining as a lead member, along with one more person in a support role. After Natalie's announcement, the room buzzed with excitement. Despite her being relatively new to the company, there was no question that Natalie was the most capable person in the room. And no one would dispute her selection for the project. Naturally, the focus shifted to who would be chosen as her support. For many, this was an opportunity of a lifetime. A chance to leave a mark on the project could lead to rapid promotions. The atmosphere was electric with silent pleas of, "Pick me." Even Joshua seemed uncharacteristically eager, a faint glint of anticipation visible on his face. After consulting with Kyle, we've decided. As Natalie spoke, our eyes met. Marcus will be joining me as support. I'll be counting on you. When Natalie announced it, the room fell silent for a moment. The next instant, a chorus of surprised voices erupted. I, the person at the center of it all, could only sit there, dumbfounded. It felt like a mistake, a misheard statement, but the sharp stares from those around me confirmed otherwise. Wait, hold on. Why would you give such an important job to someone like Marcus? As the CEO's son, I'm obviously more suited for it. Joshua, his face bright red, lashed out at Natalie. But Natalie calmly shook her head. Marcus is the most suitable person for this project. His precision, speed, and dedication leave nothing to be criticized. That's impossible. He's just a high school grad who got demoted to a bottom tier branch. There's no way someone like that is qualified. Considering the sheer amount of work you've assigned to him, Joshua, I believe you're the one who understands his capabilities the best. Don't you? Her remark turned his constant harassment on its head, leaving Joshua speechless. While seeing him silenced was satisfying, I couldn't help but worry that his animosity toward Natalie might grow worse. After giving Joshua a polite smile, Natalie turned her attention to me at the back of the room. Marcus, your schedule has already been adjusted. Please check it immediately. Got it? Yes, I understand. That's all for now. Let's all have a productive day. With a polite bow, Natalie dismissed the meeting. I wasn't the only one struggling to process what had just happened. But Natalie's words weren't a suggestion, they were a firm decision. From that day, my life changed drastically. Our task involved securing land in the planned development area by negotiating with local real estate agents and landowners. While Natalie took the lead, I worked on compiling data, calculating financial projections, and preparing persuasive materials to support our negotiations. As expected, Marcus. This document is really well done. Thank you. Being praised by Natalie boosted my motivation immensely. I'd never worked like this before, so it felt fresh and left me with a somewhat ticklish sense of satisfaction. I also got approval from Kyle. You'll be accompanying me to the next meeting. It'll be more persuasive if the person who prepared these materials presents them. Wait, what? But I've never done anything like that before. I'm terrible at presentations. I've always been the type who struggles to talk to people. Especially when speaking to those in positions above me, the faces of my relatives, looking annoyed and inconvenienced, often come to mind. And I freeze up. In all my previous jobs, I stuck to behind-the-scenes roles, so it was never an issue. Even with this major project, I managed because I had the excuse of being Natalie's support. But presentations and negotiations, just thinking about them makes my blood run cold. That's exactly why you should challenge yourself. I believe you need to gain more experience, Marcus. But what if I fail? Failure is fine. Her sharp tone cut through my hesitation. No one in this world becomes successful without experiencing failure. Well, this project is big, yes, but one meeting won't decide everything. Even if you fail this time, we'll regroup, come up with better proposals, and meet again. That's how success is achieved. Her expression softened as she continued. And to support you through such failures, you have your supervisors and team members, don't you? So don't be afraid. Take the plunge. Until now, I'd never had anyone say things like that to me. I had long given up expecting anything from those around me. But Natalie, she gave me the words I'd always wanted to hear. As if she could see past my surface and into the parts of me I didn't want anyone to touch. I believe you can do this, Marcus. So have confidence, okay? Natalie. I'll do my best. That's the spirit. Well then, I'd better put in some effort too. Satisfied with my response, Natalie nodded and returned to her work. Watching her focused expression, I felt a surge of determination. I want to do my best, for her. A warmth I'd never experienced before started growing inside me. With Natalie's encouragement, I poured even more energy into making the project a success. Fortunately, Joshua's influence didn't extend much beyond our department, and the rest of the team welcomed me warmly. For the first time since I started working, I found myself in an environment that could only be described as ideal. Fueled by this, I accomplished an impressive amount of work. In addition to my strengths in data collection and document creation, I began working on project proposals and presentation materials with Natalie's guidance, even challenging myself to deliver actual presentations. Being inexperienced and uncomfortable with interpersonal tasks, I made many mistakes, but each time Natalie and the team stepped in to support me, helping to refine and improve my work with every failure. The first time a presentation I delivered succeeded, I was so overwhelmed that, embarrassingly, I couldn't stop the tears. The faces of the clients who appreciated my proposal, the teammates who worked hard alongside me, and Natalie, who always supported me. Their smiles and kind words lit a warm fire in my heart. It's only been about 2 months, yet I felt a sense of fulfillment I've never experienced before, and even I'm surprised by it. Thanks to being so busy, Joshua and his clique haven't had a chance to harass me. I no longer had to work overtime, and my mental and physical health stabilized. Even Alice seemed relieved to see me like this. "Marcus, do you enjoy your work now?" What's with the sudden question? It's just, you've been so different from how you were back then. Back then. Alice was probably referring to the time when I had just started working at the company. I was a complete mess then, causing her terrible worry even though she was hospitalized at the time. Remembering those days still fills me with intense regret, making my chest ache with unbearable pain. Alice. I'm sorry for back then. No, that's not it. It's just, I know how much you worked so hard for me, and I'm so grateful for that. But I still want to see you smiling too. That's why I'm happy now. Alice, thank you. I gently patted her head as she looked like she was about to cry. For me, work had always been just a means of survival. Nothing more, nothing less. But after meeting Natalie, something began to change. In just a short time, I experienced so much that my entire perspective on work shifted. Now, I could truly say, I enjoy working. Every day felt truly fulfilling. I even began to hope that this sense of fulfillment would last forever. A hope that I had no right to wish for. That day, as I worked at my desk for the first time in a while, a colleague approached me. "Marcus, Joshua wants to speak with you. Please go to conference room 3. Joshua? I've delivered the message, so make sure you go." With a sharp glare, she hurried away. I stopped what I was doing and stood up. A small group had gathered around the messenger, whispering and glancing my way. Casting them a brief look, I made my way to conference room 3. If Natalie had been here, she might have told me, "You don't have to go." But for me, that wasn't an option. As I waited in the empty conference room, loud footsteps echoed from outside. The sound was intense, even with the carpeted floor, making it clear that whoever was approaching was highly agitated. Suddenly, the door was flung open with a bang. "Oh, you're already here." Waiting before I even arrived, impressive. Joshua strode in and threw himself into the seat at the head of the table. His arrogant tone and behavior made me sigh internally. "So, what did you want to talk about?" "Marcus, I want you to step down from the project." "What? Didn't you hear me? Or is your hearing as bad as your intelligence?" Joshua sneered, mocking me. "It'd look much better to have the CEO's son on the project instead of someone as useless as you, don't you think? What are you talking about? You take the back seat, and I'll take the lead. That's how it's always been, hasn't it? Just do the same thing now, Marcus." A sly grin spread across Joshua's face. "It's simple. Go to Kyle right now and tell him, this is too much for me. Joshua is the better choice. Cry if you have to." Joshua's words made me so furious I felt like the veins in my head were about to burst. That project was already built on the efforts of so many people. Abandoning it now and leaving it to someone else was something I couldn't and wouldn't do. Especially if that someone else was Joshua, that was absolutely out of the question. "No. What's that? Your voice is too quiet, I can't hear you." Joshua smirked, cupping a hand to his ear mockingly. I clenched my fists tightly and shouted at him. I said no. "I'm not stepping down from this project." "What?" The voice that came out was louder than I had expected, surprising even myself, but it seemed Joshua was just as stunned. He stood there in shock, likely unprepared for resistance from someone he considered obedient. But soon, his expression twisted, gradually consumed by anger. Have you forgotten your place, Marcus? Joshua stood up and glared at me sharply. Refusing to back down, I glared right back at him. My defiance seemed to infuriate him further, and he angrily kicked a nearby chair with full force. The chair crashed into the wall with a loud, jarring sound. If that's how you want to play it, then I'll ruin her reputation, too. Her? Natalie, of course. The bosses adore her. She's competent, attractive, and poised for a promotion if this project succeeds. But what do you think will happen if I expose your past? The blame will fall on Natalie for recommending you. What? Images of Natalie's serious expressions and resolute demeanor flashed through my mind, sending a sharp pain through my chest. At the same time, a surge of anger toward Joshua overwhelmed me, and my clenched fists began to tremble. You're disgusting. How far will you go? Ha! Coming from you? That's rich. You're just a... Before Joshua could finish his insult, a voice interrupted. What's all the commotion about? I heard a loud noise. Standing in the doorway was Natalie. She glanced between Joshua's smirk, my tense expression, and the overturned chair on the floor, clearly confused. Natalie! Ha ha! This is perfect. Let Natalie hear the truth about this man's identity. Joshua, stop. Shut up. It's your fault for defying me. Joshua, what do you mean by Marcus' true identity? At Natalie's question, Joshua grinned smugly and pointed at me, shouting loudly. This guy here? He's a criminal who's been locked up before. Hearing Joshua's words, my vision went black. Natalie, she knows now. The past I desperately wanted to keep hidden, it all happened less than a year after I joined King Partners. Thanks to Mr. King's generosity, I managed to secure a job, and that same year, Alice successfully passed her exams and started high school. However, the stress of adapting to her new environment seemed to take its toll, and Alice's health deteriorated rapidly, forcing her to be hospitalized again. It had only been a few months since her last hospitalization. Every day after work, I visited her at the hospital, and as I held Alice tightly while she cried and said, I'm sorry, Marcus. All I could do was reassure her that everything would be okay. While it wasn't life-threatening, Alice's weakened condition required a significant hospital stay for recovery, and that, of course, came with a hefty price tag. The hospital had known Alice since she was little and understood our circumstances as siblings. But understanding didn't mean the expenses would be waived. If our parents had been alive, their insurance might have covered the costs, but during the years we were shuffled between relatives. The insurance payments had lapsed, and the policies were eventually canceled. As a high school grad in my first year of work, my monthly take-home pay was about $1,500. The previous hospital bills, combined with the costs of Alice's high school entrance fees and supplies, had drained the little savings we had. Even by cutting back on living expenses, coming up with the funds for this hospital stay seemed nearly impossible. Having left our relatives' homes to live on our own, I didn't even consider turning to them for help. They wouldn't have offered it anyway. So, I decided to restart the part-time jobs I had quit after finding full-time employment. These were the jobs I had been doing since middle school to support Alice and myself. From the beginning, I had taken on some questionable work, but desperate to gather the hospital fees as quickly as possible, I delved into even riskier jobs than before. In the end, I was arrested and, though it was for a short period, served time in prison. I had prepared myself for the worst, even being fired, for causing trouble at work. But instead, Mr. King reassured me, saying, "You did it for your sister, didn't you? Don't worry. Leave it to me," and he didn't abandon me. During Alice's hospitalization, Mr. King not only helped care for her but also ensured that news of my arrest was kept secret within the company to avoid jeopardizing my reinstatement. I could never express enough gratitude to him, but Joshua was the complete opposite. Perhaps he resented his father's decision to bring me into the company. From the moment I joined, Joshua constantly antagonized me. When I was released and returned to work, Joshua somehow found out about my arrest and began using it as blackmail, forcing me to cover for his mistakes and take on his responsibilities. The mistake that led to my transfer to the branch office 5 years ago was, in fact, Joshua's doing. I'll never forget his face at that moment. His mistake never came to light, and he was even able to bring me down, someone his father had supported, with that grotesque, twisted smile of satisfaction. And now, he was standing before me. Joshua wore the exact same expression he had back then. How about it, Natalie? Now you see that this guy isn't who you thought he was. If you let him handle this, he'll screw up again. And not only will everything go down the drain, but he'll tarnish the company's reputation too. Natalie said nothing, remaining silent. Unable to meet her gaze, I looked down. I didn't want to see her disappointment. No matter the circumstances, the fact that I had committed a crime and served time was undeniable. If she looked at me with disdain because of it, I had to accept that as my reality. But I just wanted to spend a little more time with Natalie. Now that my shadowy past had been exposed, that was the feeling that lingered in my heart. Although we've only known each other for a short time, I suddenly realized how much my heart had leaned toward her. Now that I recognized it, I couldn't help but laugh at myself for harboring feelings that would never bear fruit. So, now you understand, don't you? That's why I should be on that project. Joshua's voice was filled with triumph. It carried the unwavering confidence of someone who believed everything was going exactly as he had planned. Even so, it has nothing to do with the current project. Natalie, what are you saying? He's a criminal. And what of it? In stark contrast to Joshua's flustered voice, Natalie's resolute tone echoed through the room. Joshua, you're right, he did commit a crime. But he faced trial, served his sentence, and paid for his actions. As for the transfer, he worked diligently for 5 years at the branch office and has continued to fulfill his responsibilities for the company since returning to the head office. So, tell me, what fault do you find in Marcus now? He's a criminal, so he can't be trusted. Do you believe criminals have no chance for rehabilitation? Then what's the purpose of trials and prisons in the first place? Ugh. Joshua stammered, sweat forming on his brow. Natalie cast him a brief glance before lowering her eyes sadly. Everyone carries something with them in life. It might be a burden they can't share with others or scars they're too ashamed to show. But no matter how messy or ungraceful it seems, we have to keep living. That's what being human is. As she finished speaking, Natalie looked directly into my eyes. Her gaze was strong yet filled with incredible kindness. And people like that, people who face their struggles, are much stronger for it. I know that to be true. Natalie. Her words felt as if they were spoken directly to me. Natalie, you've got some nerve giving me a lecture. Joshua's furious outburst snapped me out of my thoughts. When I looked at him, his face was flushed red with anger. I'll show you what happens to people who defy me. Don't think either of you will stay in this company. Is that so? Perhaps you should discuss this with your father? Natalie's cold gaze shifted toward Joshua. Her icy stare caused him to falter, and he slowly backed toward the door. If I tell my father, you two will be out of here in no time. You'd better start packing. With a shout worthy of a second-rate villain, Joshua stormed out of the conference room in a flurry of noise. Silence fell, leaving only Natalie and me behind. Marcus, are you okay? After confirming that Joshua was completely gone, Natalie walked over to me. Her voice was so gentle that it effortlessly broke through my defenses, and my tears began to flow uncontrollably. Natalie. It's okay. Take your time. As she said that, she gently rubbed my back. The warmth of her hand seemed to seep deep into my heart, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. I've always regretted it, what I did. When I was arrested. I later learned from the nurse in charge that Alice had cried all night in her hospital bed after finding out. She kept blaming herself, thinking it was because of her frailty. But after that, Alice changed. She started exercising, even though she hated it, to build strength. She overcame her picky eating habits, one by one. She worked tirelessly to catch up on her studies, which had been delayed by her repeated hospitalizations, and enrolled in nursing school to become a nurse. Next spring, she will finally achieve that dream and begin her career. I want you to start spending time on yourself now, Marcus. That's why I'll do my best. She said that with a smile the day I was released on bail. The weak, fragile little sister I thought I had to protect was gone. For Alice, who genuinely wished for my rehabilitation, I resolved to work hard as if I had been reborn. That's what I thought, but even if I atone for my sins, the fact that I committed a crime will never disappear. The harder I try to reinvent myself, the more it feels like my past keeps following me. I'm terrified that everyone who gets involved with me will end up unhappy. After spending over a decade deceiving myself, my heart was far more broken than I had realized. If I took any more emotional damage, I'd shatter into pieces, never to recover. That's why I'd always avoided getting too close to people. Natalie. I'm sorry, It's okay. Despite my tears and overwhelming regret, Natalie stayed by my side, as kind as ever. Her gentle voice and the warmth of her hand on my back gradually calmed the storm in my heart. You really are such a kind person. I've heard all kinds of things about you from Joshua and the others. But after working with you and talking to you, even for a short time, I can't believe that you're a bad person. She smiled as she spoke. You're different from Joshua, who enjoys stepping on the weak, or the sycophants who just follow the strong. Natalie. Isn't Joshua your boyfriend? Boyfriend, huh? He threatened to fire me if I didn't date him. I couldn't afford to lose my job, so I had no choice. Joshua, that bastard. I clenched my fists in anger, but Natalie let out a small laugh. You're the only one who gets angry for me like this, Marcus. Even when I was overwhelmed by Joshua's harassment, you were the only one who reached out to help. I just helped on a whim. Besides, you helped me first. That's true, she said with a gentle laugh. But I was really happy you helped me. I was happy when she thanked me that day I helped her with work. But somehow, hearing her words now made me even happier. Why couldn't I look away from her smile? Marcus, as I said before, you've paid for your mistakes. Even now, you continue to regret them. Someone like you, who recognizes their sins and repents, can truly turn their life around. I believe that. Her words resonated deeply in my now calm heart, melting away the lingering pain. Keep looking forward. Hold your head high and walk proudly. Her words were strong and resolute, but her expression remained endlessly kind. I nodded firmly in response. Natalie, thank you. You have a good expression now. You were wonderful before, but I like you even more now. What? My face grew hot at her sudden compliment, and I could feel myself blushing. Hearing my voice crack in surprise, Natalie burst out laughing. Ha ha. No need to sound so shocked. Her cheerful and bright demeanor was a stark contrast to her usual coolness. But it was so sudden, and Marcus, your face is bright red. She laughed again, clearly enjoying herself. Aren't you acting a bit different, Natalie? Really? This is just my true self. Her voice, much brighter than usual, carried an unexpected cheerfulness. As I stood there confused, Natalie gave me a playful wink. Her adorable expression made my heart race uncontrollably. Seeing me completely frozen, like a crashed program, Natalie laughed joyfully for a while. Meanwhile, Joshua, after throwing a tantrum, had stormed out and gone straight home. He had thrown out the parting threat, "I'll tell Mr. King," which left me worried. But Natalie had said, Mr. King isn't the kind of person who would make foolish decisions based solely on his son's words. Her reassurance prompted me to respond, "You're right," but I still couldn't shake my unease. Joshua had directed his words at both me and Natalie, saying, "I'll make sure you're both fired. I don't care what happens to me. But I want to protect Natalie, no matter what." As I watched Natalie's unusually serious profile, this thought firmly planted itself in my mind. The next morning, after the team meeting, I was summoned to the CEO's office. Relieved that I was the only one called, I stood up from my seat. "Looks like Mr. King himself is going to fire me," I muttered. "It's because he defied Joshua, he should have just kept quiet like us." I could hear my colleagues whispering among themselves. I overheard their quiet comments, and when I looked over, Joshua stood at the center of the group, smirking. Judging by his expression, he must have reported me and Natalie to his father, just as he had threatened. His face practically screamed, "Serves you right." Ignoring them completely, I made my way out of the room. "Marcus!" As I stepped outside, Natalie called out to me. "Natalie, Here, you dropped your pen." "Huh? Really? Oh, thank you." Before I could react, Natalie smoothly placed the pen back into my chest pocket. "I'm honestly nervous. It's my first time being summoned by Mr. King." Perhaps because it was Natalie, my true feelings slipped out without hesitation. "But as you said, Mr. King isn't the type to blindly believe everything his son says, right? You'll be fine. No matter what he says, hold your head high." "Thank you." "All right, I'll be going now." I nodded to Natalie and headed toward the CEO's office. Placing a hand over my chest, I touched the pen Natalie had slipped into my pocket. Wait, did I even have a pen there to begin with? "Hey, Natalie. This pen." When I turned around, she was already gone. "Well, no matter. It feels kind of like a good luck charm." I murmured to myself and continued toward the CEO's office. "Ah, Marcus. Sorry for calling you in so early this morning." As I entered the CEO's office, I was greeted by Mr. King's smiling face. Once he had everyone else leave the room, it was just the two of us left. The air grew tense as he began to speak. "Marcus, my son has made a suggestion that both you and Natalie should be dismissed immediately." "I see." That was all I could manage to say. The atmosphere made it clear that being asked to leave wasn't out of the question. "However, rest assured, I have no intention of letting you go," Mr. King said with a smile. "I'm the one who values your abilities, Marcus, not anyone else. I have no intention of paying attention to Joshua's foolish nonsense. In fact, I'm deeply disappointed in my idiotic son because of this incident. Mr. King. If he were just a fool, I might have left him alone. But as things stand, it seems he'll only get in your way. So, I've decided to send him to the Sullivan branch in your place." It was ironic that Joshua would now be sent to the very branch I had worked at for the past 5 years, the one he himself had mocked as a dumping ground. Still, this would likely bring some peace to that department. And Natalie, who had been forced to play along with Joshua's charade of a relationship, would finally be free. I felt a wave of relief and unconsciously placed a hand on my chest. Noticing this, Mr. King continued speaking. "He acted as he did because he doesn't truly understand your abilities. That ignorance makes him a fool. But on the other hand, I see your real potential and value. That's why I brought you back to the main office. I believe you'll dedicate yourself to helping this company grow." As he said this, he took my hands firmly in his. "Marcus, please use your full abilities to support the future development of this company." His powerful words brought a warmth to my eyes. This was the man who, back when I was just a high school student, had listened to my story and given me a place in his company. Not so long ago, I might not have been able to accept these words from even someone like him. But after meeting Natalie and deciding to embrace my weaknesses, everything felt different. I was truly grateful for Mr. King's trust. Thank you so much, Mr. King. Hearing my heartfelt words, Mr. King nodded with a satisfied smile. Then, he added, now, to get straight to the point. I'll need you to step down from your current project. What? I froze, unable to immediately grasp Mr. King's words. But even as he looked at my confusion, his smile didn't waver. Ah, don't worry, he said reassuringly. I have a job in mind that only you can do, Marcus. As he spoke, Mr. King handed me a file. Mr. King, what is this? And what do you mean about removing me from the project? He didn't answer my question. His smile remained unwavering, but its steadiness began to instill a growing sense of dread in me. I want you to hack the companies listed here and extract any information that could be useful for future negotiations. If you can't find anything, fabricate some convincing rumors and spread them. Mr. King, what are you saying? I've been impressed with your skills, Marcus. Or should I say, Ash? The name Mr. King uttered was the one I had used during my certain jobs. After my arrest and serving my sentence, I had buried that name, and no one was supposed to know it. How do you know that name? In response to my question, Mr. King's smile deepened. The man standing before me was no longer the Mr. King I thought I knew. It's simple. I was the one who hired you to do those jobs when you were a black hat hacker in middle school. No way. You were truly exceptional. Thanks to you, this company grew tremendously. You helped us outmaneuver competitors time and time again. And during those desperate times when you were scrambling to pay for your sister's treatment, you took on incredibly risky jobs. Your work was nothing short of brilliant. As he spoke, Mr. King spread his arms wide, only to sigh deeply and shake his head a moment later. The exaggerated, theatrical gestures sent a faint chill down my spine, making me shudder. But I got a bit too ambitious, it seems. When the police started sniffing around, I panicked. Fortunately, you took the fall for me. And I avoided any trouble. You were my savior. Wait, you mean my arrest back then? That's right. I leaked your information to the police. You were caught so easily, it was a great relief. And you've continued to cover for my idiot son's failures, protecting this company's reputation. Honestly, we owe you so much. Overwhelmed by one shocking revelation after another, I could do nothing but stand there in stunned silence. It was all I could do to remain on my feet, my mind unable to process anything. Mr. King reached out and grasped my hand once again. Earlier, the gesture had moved me, but now, all I could feel was disgust. I want you to work exclusively for our company. Hearing those words, I shook off Mr. King's hand. Don't be ridiculous. I've paid for my crimes and decided to start over from scratch. I'll never use my skills for wrongdoing again. Oh? So you're refusing my offer? The gentle smile Mr. King had worn moments ago vanished, replaced by a low, menacing voice that echoed through the office. For a moment, I felt intimidated, but images of Alice, my parents, and Natalie, along with their words, filled my mind, giving me strength. Clenching my stomach muscles, I shouted with all my might. I won't take on any more dirty work. My words reverberated in the room, followed by a heavy silence. So, you intend to repay my kindness with betrayal? What? Who gave a clueless high school grad like you a job? Who looked after your sister while you were in prison? Who let you return to this company? No questions asked, despite your criminal record? You? I did all of that because your skills as a hacker were valuable to me. And now you dare to refuse me? You'll find it difficult to navigate the world if you don't use your head a bit more. Mr. King let out a mocking snort. His expression, his demeanor, everything about him was exactly like Joshua. No, perhaps it was the other way around. Joshua was the spitting image of his father. For the first time, I fully grasped how closely the two resembled each other, both in appearance and character. Oh, yes. I've heard you've been getting close to Natalie lately. He said this with a sly smile. Did you know she's carrying a significant amount of debt? That's why she left her previous job and came here for the better pay. If she were to suddenly lose her job, well, what do you think would happen to her? How far will you stoop? I use whatever I can. That's my motto, ha ha ha. This was the true nature of Mr. King. The trust one had once placed in him shattered into pieces. There was no way I could continue working for someone like him, but if I refused now, Natalie would be dragged down with me. I hadn't known about her debt before, but I understood all too well what it meant to struggle with money. I had no choice but to close my eyes tightly. Overwhelmed by the crushing reality of being forced to chase well-paying work instead of pursuing what I truly wanted. Stand tall and face the world with confidence. Natalie's words came back to me. I'm sorry, Natalie. You gave me the courage to fight, but becoming Mr. King's pawn would mean betraying Natalie. Yet, if it meant protecting her, perhaps that was a price I was willing to pay. Well, Marcus? Have you made your decision? Mr. King's voice was laced with smug certainty, as if he already knew my answer. The condescension in his tone stung deeply. I opened my eyes, locking my gaze on his, determined to show at least a semblance of resistance. Will you promise not to harm Natalie? I promise. Having Natalie thriving in the spotlight and you, Marcus, working in the shadows is the ideal scenario for me. King's smile widened. It was the most wicked and vile expression I had ever seen on anyone. I understand. Just as I was about to say those words, opening my mouth to respond. Bang! The office door swung open with a deafening crash, causing both Mr. King and me to snap our heads toward it. That's enough. A commanding, resolute voice filled the room. There stood Natalie, her expression fierce as she fixed an unwavering glare on Mr. King. Natalie! How are you here? I made sure we wouldn't be disturbed. Mr. King's voice was a mix of shock and panic as he reached for the intercom to summon his secretary. Natalie, unshaken, met his frantic movements with a chilling calm. There's no one here. None of your allies, at least. What? Mr. King stammered, his mouth opening and closing uselessly under the weight of Natalie's unyielding presence. The smugness that had been plastered on his face just moments ago was completely gone. As for me, I could only stand there, stunned, unable to process the whirlwind unfolding before my eyes. Natalie strode into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Stopping in front of Mr. King, she pulled out a slim recording device, pressing a button. Clear audio of the conversation I had just had with Mr. King began playing, every word ringing out sharply in the silent room. Thanks to your loud voice, everything came through loud and clear. As she said this, Natalie turned to look at me. Her eyes landed on the pen she had given me earlier. Wait. That pen. You tricked me. Damn it. Hand that over. Panic flashed across Mr. King's face as he lunged for the recorder in Natalie's hand, his desperation palpable. But Natalie sidestepped gracefully, her voice icy as she responded. Don't bother. Destroying this won't change anything. Natalie pulled out a set of documents and thrust them toward Mr. King. Frederick King, you are under arrest for embezzlement and aggravated breach of trust. From there, events spiraled quickly. Several police officers entered the office, moving decisively toward Mr. King. Although he initially resisted, he eventually slumped in defeat, allowing himself to be escorted out with his head hanging low. Meanwhile, chaos erupted outside the office as news spread of the arrest, with onlookers and reporters crowding the scene. As I was being escorted to another room for questioning, I caught sight of Natalie. A strong feeling gripped me. If I didn't speak to her now, I might never get the chance again. Natalie. Natalie turned around at the sound of my voice. Marcus. I'm sorry. I deceived you and used you. And the truth is, I knew everything about your past. Her expression was pained, as though she might break into tears at any moment. I don't care about any of that. If I could help you, that's all that matters to me. I still had so much more I wanted to say, but it felt like time had run out as the police officers around us moved with hurried determination. Marcus, thank you. I'm glad I met you. Her words sounded almost like a farewell. Natalie gently took the pen from my chest pocket and turned on her heel. Wait. Natalie. But she didn't respond to my call, walking away to rejoin her true colleagues without looking back. That evening, news and newspapers reported the arrest of Mr. King. The numerous scandals that emerged from King Partners, a real estate company that had seen significant growth, sent shockwaves throughout the industry. The project Natalie and I had been working on was cancelled. And the Mr. King's wrongdoings had robbed people of their land and driven companies into bankruptcy. Many victims filed lawsuits against both the company and Mr. King, resulting in massive compensation claims. Ultimately, the company went bankrupt. Joshua and his cronies, who had tormented former employees, also faced lawsuits for harassment and were burdened with damages and settlements. The collapse of the company left me temporarily unemployed, but during that time, Alice balanced school and part-time work to support our household. Her strength, both physical and emotional, filled me with pride and gratitude beyond words. Alice successfully graduated from nursing school and now dedicates herself to helping patients as a nurse. As for me, inspired by Natalie's recognition of my abilities, I took a bold step and founded my own cybersecurity company. Once a black hat hacker, I decided the best way to use my skills was to help others and make a positive impact. No matter what I do, my past cannot be erased. That's precisely why I focus on what I can do now. What should I do moving forward? Instead of being trapped by my past, I've decided to embrace everything, my mistakes, my growth, and keep moving forward. To hold my head high and smile confidently in front of her. Due to work, Alice and I now live apart, but we both enjoy fulfilling lives and find happiness in our respective journeys. It's been nearly a year since that shocking day. Since then, I haven't seen Natalie. Without knowing her contact information, all I could do was ask the police officer who helped me to pass along my details to her. The fact that I've heard nothing from her to this day, that silence feels like her answer. Ring, ring. The phone at my company rang. Answering the call, I was told that a woman named Amelia was here to see me. Puzzled by the unfamiliar name, I tilted my head in thought but told them to let the guest in. Hearing the gentle knock on the door, I moved to greet the guest and opened it. I murmured in shock, as standing before me was someone I never expected to see. It's been a while, Marcus. Hearing that voice for the first time in a year, I felt a rush of emotion well up, making my eyes sting. Natalie. I don't go by that name anymore. Amelia, that's my real name. Amelia. I repeated, and as soon as her name left my lips, her face lit up with the brightest smile. I'm not used to hearing you call me that, but it makes me happy. Her unpretentious words, paired with that radiant smile, sent my heart racing. Even though my pulse felt completely out of control, Amelia continued speaking, unfazed. Work has kept me so busy I couldn't get in touch, but I heard you started your own company, and I wanted to congratulate you. Is that so? Thank you for going out of your way. It's only been a year, but you've come so far. I owe it all to you for being able to start my own business. Marcus. Amelia looked surprised, her eyes widening, as I smiled at her. I lacked confidence and spent my days sulking in isolation. But because you, Natalie, Amelia, believed in me, I was able to face my feelings and resolve to move forward no matter what. I truly owe you so much. Amelia quietly listened to my words. Maybe it was just part of your job, Amelia, but it still made me happy. Thank you so much. I bowed deeply. Finally, I managed to express the gratitude I couldn't convey a year ago, and that felt fulfilling. There was one more thing I hadn't said, but I worried it might trouble her. She was such a dedicated and earnest person, and the last thing I wanted was to make her uncomfortable. That's not true. Amelia. A faint murmur escaped her lips. Instinctively, I asked her what she said, only to freeze when I saw her expression. Tears shimmered in her serene, elegant eyes. It wasn't for work. Everything I told you back then, it was all true. I should have hidden my feelings, but I couldn't. Because I genuinely fell in love with you. What? I knew I shouldn't come here, but I just couldn't stay away. I had to see you again. Before she could say another word, I pulled her into my arms. Let me say this too. I've loved you all this time. I've always wanted to see you again. Her body trembled slightly in my embrace. Marcus, is that really true? I swear, I'll never lie to you again. I gently wiped the tears from her damp cheeks with my fingers. She gave a sweet smile, her shoulders slightly shrugging as if tickled. Neither will I. No more lies between us. The two of us gazed at each other for a while, and before we knew it, our faces slowly drew closer. After our lips gently brushed together, she gave me a mischievous smile. Hey, don't you think a former top hacker and a police officer make the most dramatic couple ever? And so, the story of the cool policewoman and her reformed hacker husband taking on the world's wrongdoers began. But that's a tale for another time.